So we started reading in the Rambam in Hilchos Malachim, Al Shisha Devarim Nitztavu Adam Harishon, that Adam was given 6 commandments: Al Avodah Zarah, on idolatry, Al Birkas Hashem, on cursing God's name, Al Shvichas Damim, murder, Al Gili Arayos, on sexual immorality, Al Gezel, on theft, Val Adinim, and the positive commandment to set up a system of civil law. Even though all of these were received from Moshe, meaning we, the Jewish people, received all these commandments through prophecy. And there's also within human intuition, there is the awareness that these are good things to do. We have also received them through the formalized commandments of the Torah. And I think what the Rambam is alluding to is that all these things are generally, intuitively, things that we should keep. However, when we get into the details, when we get into the weeds and the technicalities, as they say, the devil is in the details, so you have to define what these things are, like what's considered murder, what's considered theft. Right? Okay, don't steal, very nice. Everyone can agree that it's not good to steal, but we have to define what those things are. So understanding them in the context of the Torah, i.e. the law, the legal system, the codes, that's why the Torah has to lay them out and unpack them. Hosif leNoach Ever Minachai. In Noach's time, we had the additional commandment of not eating the flesh off of a living animal. Meaning, if you're going to eat from animal flesh, you have to kill the animal first. Ach basar benafsho damo lo tuchelu. That's what the pasuk says in Sefer Bereshis.
Who gave that? Like the prophets, you're saying that received the notion that this is what we have to do in this time of Noah?
Well, the 7 mitzvahs of Noach were given to Noach. He was the prophet that received those. He was the prophet that received those mitzvahs.
And who listened to Noach?
Who listened to Noach?
As authority.
Well, he was in luck because the only other human beings alive were his kids, so he had an advantage that they would. Yeah, this is post.
I meant in his before the Mabul.
No, this was post. This was post the flood,
okay,
right?
Okay,
this is after the Mabul. So Nimsa Sheva mitzvah. So these are the 7 mitzvahs. Now, what's interesting is we all have heard of the 7 Noahide laws.
Right.
So it's what the Rambam is giving us, and this is from the Gemara in Sanhedrin, that clarifies that la'avda l'shamra, the purpose of Adam being put into the garden. People ask, well, why did God put Adam into the garden? Well, to have a good time. It's the Garden of Eden, to enjoy yourself. He said, no, he put him in the garden, la'avda l'shamra, to work it and to guard it. That's why he put him in the garden. So the Gemara says that what this is alluding to are the mitzvos aseh, la'avda, the positive commandments, the active commandments, l'shamra, the negative commandments. As the Gemara in Pesachim says, Shamor pen va'al, those terminologies, Shamor, are always alluding to a mitzvos losase, to a negative commandment. Shmor pen al, guard, lest you do this, and al, don't do that thing. all of those terminologies are referring to a negative commandment. So when it says Shamor, right, to guard the garden, it's referring to the negative commandments, the don't do's. So why is it that we call them the Noahide laws and not the Adam laws? So you can give a simple answer that, well, there weren't 7 laws at the time of Adam. Ever Minachai didn't exist yet. Eating flesh off a live animal didn't exist yet because Adam wasn't able to eat the flesh of an animal at all. He wasn't able to eat meat at all. So the commandment only became relevant at the time of Noach. So that's why we call them the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. But I think that's kind of like a cop-out answer because, okay, the vast majority of them were relevant even before Noach, but we call them the Noahide laws. So I think the idea is that Noach was the first generation that experienced these things as commandments, meaning top-down or outside commandments that are being given that you have to submit to. Whereas Adam didn't relate to these things as commandments. He was so intuitively aligned with them that it wasn't a commandment. It was perhaps an instruction or a directive. Hashem was guiding him. Hashem was giving him instruction, communicating with him. But there wasn't, this forceful act of, I'm commanding you to do this and you better do it. Adam didn't relate to God's word in that way. So that's why we call them the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, that they were only grasped as mitzvos after the flood, after the world went through this cataclysmic event. And the consciousness of mankind had drastically changed. Right? As the Mishnah and Avos tells us, the 10 generations between Adam and Noach, they were all wicked. They all were just like, it just was a downward slide for that whole time. So only at the generation of Noach did they have the consciousness that relates to mitzvahs. I believe the Rabbi brings this on the Gemara that says mitzvahs betelos la'atid lavo. That it says that mitzvahs will be nullified in the world to come or in the future. So one of the very powerful explanations of that is that we will not relate to these things as mitzvos in the same way that we relate to them now. We relate to the things that we have. There's an element of submission there, right? The iskafia, the forcing the self to submit and conform to mitzvos. That's why they're called mitzvos. That's why they're called commandments. But la'atid lavo, we will not relate to these things in that way. There won't be any forced iskafia, submissive conformity to the mitzvos. That's an interesting idea. Anyway. So Noach had this one additional mitzvah. V'chein haya hadavar b'chol ha'olam ad Avram. That was with all of mankind. They had these mitzvos until Avram Avinu. It's interesting to note that in Sefer Bereshis, so we have the span of 2,000 years is told over in two parshios. Bereshis and Noach spans 2,000 years. From Adam HaRishon until Avram. Avram is introduced at the end of Parshas Noach. And then from, let's say, Parshas Lech Lecha until Parshas Vayishlach is about 200 years. And then from Yaakov until the end of the Torah is roughly 50 years. So there's massive discrepancy in the amount of real estate that these stories get. The first 2,000 years, we could basically rush through them. We could rush through them. Right? Once you get past the Chet of the Eitz Hadas, so everything is just downhill forever. There's an interesting possibility for salvation with the Noach story, and that also is botched. And then Avram is the new salvation program for the world, and that gets most of the time. And what really gets honed in on is when Klal Yisrael becomes a family. When Yaakov Avinu sets up a family, which, as we know, families are the potential for the greatest building, and they're also the potential for the greatest dysfunction. And there is tremendous building and also tremendous dysfunction. Right? It's when the Jewish people become the beginnings of an Am is with Yaakov and his 12 children, and there's also tremendous failure. There's also tremendous failure, and the need to rebuild from that. What's interesting is the terminology that we open up the Slichos with is a borrowed term for the redemption of Yaakov's family. The redemption of Yaakov's family takes place in Parshas Vayigash with the final confrontation between Yehuda and Yosef. Yehuda approaches Yosef, and he's basically going to sacrifice himself. He's basically going to sacrifice himself. That's what he's going to do, knowing that he also has pain that he's dealing with. That he was born to the disliked wife. He knows that, and he knows that he was the, despite his capabilities and despite the fact that he was a good and loyal son, he wasn't the favorite, and that was just his lot that he had to live with. So he knows that he has what to complain about, but he's going to sacrifice himself for essentially the good of his brother and for the good of his father. Like, he's willing to sacrifice himself. And so he approaches Yosef with that knowledge. Listen, I've done things that I'm not proud of. I have a lot that I can complain about, but I'm not going to focus on that right now. Right? Man omar v'man itzdadak. That's what Yehuda says. Right? I have nothing to say. I'm not going to argue my way out of the situation. Right? We're very prone to want to, when we're confronted with the problem, want to argue the way out of it. There's no arguing the way out of it. There's only the willingness to do an authentic act of service in that moment, and that's where it's taken from. Right? It's taken from those words, and that is literally what opens the doors of salvation for the family of the Jewish people. Jewish people were first a family, and saving the family was done by this act of Yehuda, and that's why Yehuda merits to have Mashiach come from him. It's for this reason, right? The fact that Yehuda was able to come clean in many instances, right? But first by the Tamar incident, which was a warm up. That was a warm up for this, yeah. So he was given, right? It's like David HaMelech says when he confronts Goliath and says, yeah, I'll fight him. Just send me, I'll fight him. And Shaul says, "What do you mean? You're a little kid. You've never fought anything. This guy's a trained warrior." And he says, "Don't worry. Gamas ha'ari v'gamas hadov hika avdecha. I'm a shepherd. I take care of the sheep all the time. I've slain lions and tigers and bears. Oh my! I've done it all." So Rashi says that morning, before he went on his way to go visit his brothers in the battlefield, a lion and a bear the same morning came and attacked the sheep, and he was able to fend them off. So he's saying to Shaul, he says, it's not by coincidence that I encountered that event this morning. It was a warm up. It was a warm up for now. So now I'm in that mode. So now I can just continue in that direction. So anyway, yeah.
I'm just wondering, is there any disagreement on whether the warm up really was where he got the leadership? Because I guess I always thought that when he said Tzad Kavimeni to Tamar, that's when he got the leadership. The brothers had sort of, marginalized him, and then he did this great act where he could have got away with this, and he admitted it, and that's where he gained leadership. But you're saying that was
so yes, and I'll even strengthen your point, because one of the children from that union is the sign of Mashiach, right? Peretz is the father of Mashiach. But if Yehuda had not done the second one, there would have been no Jewish family for him to be the leader of. It would have all just, right? It would have all collapsed at that point.
It was a pretend fight.
Hmm?
It was a pretend fight, though. We know as a reader.
It was a pretend fight.
Well, we know.
Well, it's an interesting exercise in counterfactual, like what would have happened if they had because, as many point out, what was the logical thing for Yehuda to have done at that point? The logical thing would be to leave Binyamin in Mitzrayim and go home. Because he's clear, he's a thief. Like, Yehuda doesn't know he was framed. He doesn't know that. He could, for all he knows, he actually did steal the cup. He actually is guilty, and the guy has every right to enslave him forever. So the logical thing for him to do would probably be to turn around and go home. What would have happened if that were to be? Okay, so Yaakov probably would have, withered away in solitude forever. There wouldn't have been any impetus to bring the Jewish people to continue on. They would have had to return to Canaan in the state of famine. Right? There was no path forward from there. The Midrash, you're an expert in Midrash Tanchuma. The Midrash Tanchuma says they were ready to just destroy everything, which would have been which is basically saying a cataclysmic civil war in which everyone goes down. I think we all know the sense of that possibility, right? When things are there's such a fever pitch of tension that whatever's going to come after this is just going to destroy everyone. So that's what the Midrash is trying to say. That the tension was so high that whatever, if it's not resolved, it's just going to destroy both sides. So it's true that by the Yehuda and Tamar incident, he was given that position, but this final act was him solidifying the existence of his family to begin with. Like, there would have been no Am Yisrael if he hadn't done that.
But let's say Yosef accepted his offer, and Yosef was, in theory, he would have said, okay, so I'm going to...
Well, that was never a possibility, right? Like, it wasn't a possibility for him to switch him around.
I thought that's what he was saying.
No, he was offering that,
right.
But as we know, that was never a possibility. The possibility of them fighting it out and everyone killing each other, that was an action, that could have happened. If he hadn't decided to take the approach that he did, it could have been that's what in fact transpired. And that was the situation until Avram Avinu. So Nitztava Yeser al Elu b'Mila. Avram Avinu was given, in addition to these 7 commandments, he was also given the commandment of Mila, V'hu hispalel shachris, and he also prayed the morning prayer. Yitzchak hifrish meiser. Yitzchak, in addition to the mitzvah that Avram had, what was his mitzvah? Yitzchak's mitzvah was the mitzvah of meiser. V'hosif tefillah acheres lifnos hayom, and he had an additional tefillah as the day is coming to an end, which we call tefillas mincha. V'Yaakov hosif gid hanoshe, the negative commandment of not eating from the sinew called the gid hanoshe. V'hispalel arvis. Uv'mitzrayim nitztava Amram b'mitzvos yaseros. I don't know if anyone knows the makor of the Rambam for this, but he's saying something very interesting, that the Jewish people were under the leadership in those 1 or 2 generations of slavery. So Amram, the father of Moshe, was the leader of the Jewish people. That's what it says in the Gemara in Slichot. He was the Gadol Hador, and he made a decree that people weren't allowed to have children because they would just be killed by Pharaoh, right? And everyone accepted his decree. Until his daughter set him straight. He said, "You're making a decree against the girls and the boys. Pharaoh is only decreeing against the boys. You're decreeing against everyone." So anyway, so Amram was the Gadol Hador and the prophet, and it says that he commanded the Jewish people additional mitzvos, which is very interesting. I mean, it doesn't say which mitzvos and when and what the context was, but it says that Amram gave additional mitzvos to the Jewish people. An sheba Moshe Rabbeinu, until Moshe came, the nishlama Torah al yado, and the Torah was completed, right? Like we look at the idea of Matan Torah as this binary, like this milestone event that before there was no Torah and afterwards there is a Torah. But what the Rambam is giving is a very interesting perspective that no, there was a Torah that was developing in the world. There was a Torah developing. And Moshe's mass revelation at Sinai was the completion of that Torah. And we see a theme of that already in Chazal, that the world is divided into these different eons of history. That we have the first 2,000 years of history is the period called Tohu. The last 2,000 years of history are called the period of Mashiach. And the middle period is called the 2,000 years of Torah. 2,000 years of Torah. So the Gemara in Avodah Zarah says, when do those 2,000 years of Torah start? When did it start? You would think, well, it must have started at Sinai. And the Gemara actually suggests that. But the Gemara says, no, it can't work out that way. It's not possible for that. It just doesn't work out. So the Gemara says, when does it start? From the pasuk, V'es hanefesh asher asu b'charan. The souls that Avram and Sarah created in Haran. The souls that they created. How did they create souls? By bringing them closer to God. Through Torah. They taught them Torah. That was when the 2,000 years, right? Avram and Sarah had the first base medrash that kicked off the eon of Torah. Yeah? And what's fascinating, which I heard from what? So, I heard from right. It was the first Beit Chabad in Haran of all places. I heard from Moshe Shapiro that we know that Rav, the Amora of the first generation of Amoraim, Rav Abba, who started off in Eretz Yisrael and then needed to leave and go to Bavel. The Gemara says in many places, Rav Tana Upolig, that Rav was the last Tana. He was the last of the Tanaim. So even though he lived after the Mishnah was already written, he still had the status of a Tana, because he was the last remnant of that class of scholars from the land of Israel that had the status of a Tana, which is why Rav was able to disagree even with the Tanaic literature. When did Rav die? In the year 4004. So Avram Avinu was born in the year 1948. Es HaNefesh Asher Asu B'Charan takes place in the year 2000. And then 2004 years later, the last of the authors of the Mishnah, meaning the sages who compiled the Torah Shebaal Peh, passed away. So like almost to the date, in 2,000 years of Torah. So this is the idea of the Torah developing in the world. It takes time for the Torah to be fully hashed out and to be packaged into this thing that we call the Torah.
So how do you define that last 2,000 years? You said it's Mashiach, or the last
2,000 years of the time of Mashiach, correct.
So, like, what exactly was our history? How did our history look different from that juncture?
What it means, how I understand the years of Mashiach means that the world begins to go through massive historical, social, and conscious changes that are able to bring about the time of Mashiach. And indeed, history, as we know it, the major changes in the developed world, they begin around that time, right? The major empires begin to have their influence, right? The powers that are developed, the powers that we know of in the world today, have their origins in this period of history, roughly speaking. But it's all about the world. It's all about people and the world and history developing. It's not necessarily the Torah developing, although there has been a lot of development in Torah over that period. The 2,000 years of Mashiach parallel the 2,000 years of the exile, basically. Right? Like we've been in exile the whole time of Mashiach. The Jews have been in exile. You know. But the way that we kicked off on this before the camera started rolling is because we were discussing the idea of tefillah and how the nusach of our tefillah is, relatively speaking, not that old. It's only 2,000 years old, right? So for us, that's like last week, right? So it's only 2,000 years old. However, we have this powerful concept that the codification of Chazal, and even the codification of the Torah, are only giving parameters to themes that existed way before. So just to take the example of tefillah, which is what we started off with, we see already in Sefer Daniel, which was 500 years before the Amidah was written. In Sefer Daniel, it says that 3 times a day he would get up and he would bow to Jerusalem and pray. This was a thing that happened, because and it's not right. It wasn't just Daniel. Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov instituted these 3 periods of the day in which you pray, and this was how you did it. Right? Rav Soloveitchik Zatzal said that because the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvos says, because as it's known, the Rambam holds that it's a mitzvah saseh from the Torah to pray at least once a day. So in this description of this mitzvah, he says that part of this mitzvah is to turn towards the mikdash and pray. That's part of the mitzvah. Even from the original mitzvah d'oraisa is to pray towards the temple. And you see, indeed, by Daniel, again, pre-Chazal, right, he's turning toward Yerushalayim and praying. So ask Rav Soloveitchik, where does the Rambam get this, that it's part of the biblical commandment to turn towards Jerusalem and pray? So he says, the pasuk from Parshas Re'eh, L'shichno sidrashu vasa shama, that you will seek out the divine presence. So wherever the mikdash happens to be, that's where you turn to. You turn toward the place where the Shekhinah is resting. That used to be the Mishkan, right? When the Jews were in the Midbar, they all turned towards the Mishkan and prayed. Huh? In?
They didn't have the Beis Hamikdash yet. How did they know where to?
No, wherever the Mikdash is in that period of time, the Mikdash was in many places. In the Midbar was the Mishkan, right? And then when they came into Eretz Yisrael, it was in the Gilgal, and then they moved to Shiloh, and moved to Nov, right? Moved to all these places. So wherever the Mishkan happened to be, that's where they turned to. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, before we go into the actual Slichot over here, we're going to get a minyan.
Nobody knows about the mitzvah of Amram?
Huh?
You said we don't know what kind of mitzvah of Amram command.
No, I don't think we even know the makor of the Rambam for this statement. It's very interesting chiddush that Amram gave commandments to the Jewish people while they were in Mitzrayim.
So the names and the language and the dresses.
The language what?
The Jews there kept 3 things: names, Jewish names, the Hebrew language, and the dress. Maybe somehow.
Those were the mitzvos of Amram? Interesting idea. Never thought of that. You would think you would tell them, right, if I had to choose, right, if I was in charge, I don't know if I would choose those 3 things. I mean, they didn't even do bris milah at that point, right? They were all commanded to do bris milah before the Karban Pesach. It's interesting, yeah. Anyway, the thing that I wanted to say in light of something that I was thinking about in the afternoon after it became clear about the recent good news from Beirut that Nasrallah has left the WhatsApp group. So that's what you say nowadays, right? The person leaves the WhatsApp group, they're basically dead to you, right? They're like that. That's it. So that's
at least now that's the same, right?
So the thing that I was thinking about, there's a very powerful teaching from Rabbi Nachman that he says that a person needs to set aside time in the day to be sad. A person needs to set aside a time of the day to make a cheshbon nefesh and to identify the things that he's doing that could be better, right? To put it lightly, and the person needs to get into it. The person needs to feel the emotional weight of those lackings. And someone, especially someone like Rabbi Nachman, who we all know, emphasized the importance of the. It's not just the emotional stability, but really activating that part of the heart and mind of simcha in avodas Hashem. It's interesting that this would be one of his very powerful messages, that a daily practice of experiencing this emotional heaviness. Not just on the individual level, but also on the cosmic level, right? We have the idea of tikkun chatzos. We have the idea of mourning for the Beis Hamikdash. The Shulchan Aruch opens up as someone who fears God, who really fears God, will set aside time during the day to mourn over the destruction. Every day to mourn over the fact that there's no Beis Hamikdash. These are very heavy things. But I was thinking about that in the way to properly act out these things. And we have many areas where we are given a commandment to commune with the heaviness of the reality in which we're in. The context is everything. And what I mean by that is that there's a tendency to be very black and white about assessing our situation. Things can either be perfect or things can either be horrible. There's no other option. Even in our important sources and writings, we have this idea of la'asid lavo. And there's going to be a time in the future where things are just going to be, everything's going to be okay. Like someone's going to come, either Mashiach is going to come, or someone's going to come and make everything right. Now everything's horrible, but like one day things are going to switch around, Keharafine, everything's going to be perfect. And I think, first of all, I think that on a close examination of these sources, it's blatantly not true. That's the message they're trying to say, and we see that practically this isn't true. There's a very, very powerful teaching from Rabbi Sadia Gaon in his Siddur, that he talks about the augmentations, the changes to the nosach of the Amida depending on where the Jewish people are in history. It's very interesting, right? We spoke about how Rabbi Gamliel instituted the Amida. Was there a blessing to rebuild Jerusalem in the time of Rabbi Gamliel? No, there was a temple already. There was no request to rebuild the temple at that time. So he says, what would they pray for? They would pray for the stability of the government and that the temple should stay stable. That's what they prayed for. They didn't pray for Malchus Beis David and the temple to be rebuilt. That there was a Jewish government and there was a temple. So they would pray for the stability of the government and the government should be righteous and that the temple should be sustained. That's what they prayed for. After, things changed, so they augmented their prayer. Right? We're meant to assess the situation and pray accordingly. So our happiness and rejoicing needs to be augmented accordingly, and also our mourning needs to be augmented accordingly. I mentioned at the Sudash Slichot something that I heard from Rav Sharkey, which I thought was very, very, very powerful. That he has tremendous hakaras hatov for the media, not just the world media, but the media in Israel specifically. Why is that? Because the media portrays the situation in this country as just this brood of extremist crazies who are at the throats of all the freedom-loving people in the world and just causing endless chaos, and things are just going to hell in a handbasket. That's how they're portraying things. Is that what's actually really going on is that the Jewish people this entire past year have undergone a profound, radical shift in individual and collective consciousness, really, really awakening kochos and capacity and clarity that has not been accessible until now. And it's being portrayed as if it's just, everything is just terrible. So is it because things that require profound development need to take place b'tznius. They need to take place in secret, right? Like Chazal learned this from, if I'm not mistaken, they learned this from pregnancy itself, that when a child is developing, when a human being is developing from nothing, it needs to be in complete isolation and be completely covered. And as Chazal say, bracha smuya min ha'ayin, right? Blessing takes place, something is not revealed to the eye. It needs to be b'tzniut. It needs to be b'tzniut. So if the thing is revealed, if the thing is out in the open, it's not good. It can't develop the way it needs to. So things are happening. Profound things are happening, and thank God we're being given the cover that we need in order for them to take place. But for purposes of our conversation, I believe that with the Slichos, there's probably nothing heavier that we say during the year than the Slichos. There's nothing heavier than this. And it's an avoda that we must do. It's incumbent upon us to do it. And in a way, it's more powerful. We can access the heaviness more when we put it into context. When we understand, okay, this is going okay, this is making progress, we're doing okay over here, and this is something that needs work. and dafka from that perspective of identifying this is the missing thing. We're doing great in all these other areas, and things are really, really moving forward in all these other things. And this needs work. This needs work. That makes it even sharper. Right? The sting is even harder in many ways, because we could really, really resonate with the truth and accuracy of what it is that we're saying. Things are going great. And this really, really needs work. And Be'ezrat Hashem, through understanding this and really taking in the simcha, as Shlomo Melech says, right? Betuv tzaddik ta'alot tzir. When good happens to a righteous person, the entire city breaks out in joy. Uba'avod risha'im rina. And when a wicked person is destroyed, there is tremendous existential rejoicing. We're in tremendous existential rejoicing. This is the avoda right now. And at the same time, as we're all receiving this news on Motzei Shabbat, we're also going into Slichot. And we can hold these two things simultaneously. This tremendous, tremendous rejoicing that we're doing very well, we're making progress, and at the same time, there are things that need work. And Bezrat Hashem to take this with us into the avoda of Slichos. Mishakach.